New Testament, about the old law and the new law, and we're looking at this whole category of what is God says. He has violence in the Old Testament, but He's not in the New. And it seems like people, or Muslims, are always saying, is it not just contradictory? Don't you seem to have two different gods? Aren't you talking about two different paradigms? Does God make a mistake? Did God change His mind? And the answer is no, and the answer is right here in Matthew chapter 5. See, Jesus always comes back and gives me the answer. If you look at verse 17, in chapter 5, verse 17, He says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." And that's the operative word, fulfill. He is fulfilling what was back then. And He gives 6 different applications cutting right through chapter 5, talking about murder in verse 21, saying that even if you are angry, that is worse than murder. Or it is like murder. That's the new law. That's the new covenant. That's the New Testament. Verse 27, when He talked about adultery, that if you look at a woman wrongly, lustfully, that is committing adultery. That's the new law. That's the new covenant. That's the New Testament application. Verse 31, He's talking about divorce, that you aren't to do divorce anymore. That's the new law. That's the new covenant. Verse 33 and verse 34, it talks about oath. You've heard it say that you can give. Now you can't even swear. You're not permitted to do that anymore. That's why I love this new law. It's much more applicable for today. Coming on to verse 38, you have heard it say, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's the Mosaic law. That's the Old Testament law. But now He says, turn the other cheek. We're to turn our other cheek. And then we come to verse 43 and verse 44. Verse 43 of Matthew 5 says, you have heard it say, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. See, that's easy to do, to love people who are like you, people who are your neighbors, people who are right next to you, people who are of your own kind. And hate your enemies, that's easily to do. But what does He say in verse 44? But I tell you, you are to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. We're not permitted to hate our enemies anymore. We must love our enemies. That's the fulfillment of what God gave back there in 1400 BC with Moses, is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, saying that we are to do that which is much more difficult. In fact, this is the only scripture that says that. I don't know of any other scripture besides the Bible that gives that pronouncement. Look at any other scripture, look at any other revelation, even look at the Quran. The Quran has nothing close to that. There's nothing in the Quran that I know of that speaks about loving your enemies. I've asked this for 37 years. If you find Muslims, could you even find one verse in the Quran that says to love me, a Christian? No, you can't even get that. Chapter 9, verse 29, Surah 9:29 says to make war upon me. Chapter 8, verse 39 says to kill, to destroy those who are the unbelievers until there is no more unbelief. Chapter 47, verse 4 says to cut off the heads of the unbelievers. That's what you get in the Quran. But in the New Testament, the gospel of Jesus Christ, with Jesus Christ, He tells us to love our enemies. Unique to Jesus Christ, unique to His gospel, unique to this book, the Bible. That's why I come back. If you want peace, you've got to come back to this book. If you want peace, you've got to come back to the man behind this book, Jesus Christ. Folks, everybody's looking for peace. Everybody wants peace. That's the narrative for today. That's the catchword that I hear everywhere, but you can't find it in the Quran. You can't find it in the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas. You've got to come back to this book, the New Testament. You've got to come back to this man, Jesus Christ. What a revelation for today. That's why He's not contradicting Himself. He's not two different gods. It's not the God who has changed between 1400 BC and the first century when Jesus gave this pronouncement. It's we who have changed. That's why Jesus said, I have not come to destroy that Mosaic law. It's still there. I have come to fulfill it, to give you a whole new paradigm, a much more difficult paradigm. It's much more difficult to love your enemies than to hate your enemies. Oh, it's easy to love your friends, but to love your enemies, that's one of the most difficult things to do, and that's exactly what Jesus asks us to do in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Folks, we're ending this series on peace and violence, and it's a good one to end it on because it really shows us where is it that we're to go to. We're to come to Jesus Christ if you want peace. Matthew 5:44 is very clear. You can continue with other references too, where Christ says to put away your sword. And Matthew chapter 26, verse 52, for he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Blessed are the peacemakers. It is over and over again. Jesus comes with this paradigm of peace, 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 peace. And that's why I love Jesus. He is the man for today. He's the man for every day. He's the man for me. He's the man for you. He's the man for everyone. You want peace? Come back to Jesus. Come back to his gospel. God bless you. This is Jay here in Florida on a beautiful lake as the sun is just now setting. What a perfect timing. Setting on really this whole series of peace and violence in the New Testament questions, legitimate questions about what Jesus said and what Jesus did. Okay, this is Jay here in Florida.